Today, what I want to do is talk about how I would go about starting a startup in 5 days. What are those first 5 critical days where you're doing a bunch of work, you're doing a bunch of Googling, you're getting all the ideas out there and really trying to, make the most of the time. You don't want to let 100 days go by and have nothing progress. This is what I do basically every time, again, plus or minus a few days, depending on the idea and depending on what I'm doing. But generally speaking, this is how I approach 99% of startup building. First, so today what we're going to do is kind of go through a mock example. The example that we're going to focus on is a software solution that makes health and safety compliance easier for food truck owners. So the nice thing is I have some knowledge of this from the health and safety compliance side, but I have a lot of knowledge that I'm missing, namely the food truck owner side. So this is a perfect example because you're going to get to see me think of this stuff, live in this way. So first, let's talk about the goal for the first 5 days. It's really to get through partial or potentially a significant amount. I hesitate to say all because customer discovery and idea validation is rarely done. It's done when you sell the company. Until then, it's good to keep learning, right? But the goal for the first 5 days is to really develop as strong an understanding and as strong a case to validate our idea as possible. A lot of founders make the mistake of, I have the idea, I must go execute. Instead of, I have the idea, much like a scientist may have an idea, a stroke of genius, whatever, but then they have to go prove it. They have to go build their case. They have to go figure out, are they wrong or are they misinformed or are they making improper assumptions? There's so much that goes into it. It's not just, I have the idea, get to work. It's, I have the idea, let me test it. Now, you can commit all you want and, skip idea validation and go straight to building. I will say that there's a reason a lot of startup companies fail, that they never make it off the ground, that they waste a lot of money, mainly because they don't do this. They don't validate the idea 100 times over just to make sure. And again, there's never a certainty, but there's a difference between going into startups and spending potentially tens or hundreds of thousands of dollars with good validation and going into it with no validation or very, very poor / lazy validation. So we want to err, of course, on the former. So first, our goals for these 5 days. We want to see what the market and general competition looks like. Again, always good to know who you're competing against because you're always competing with someone, even if it's just the status quo. We want to define what the problem is because I have all these assumptions in my head about what the problem could be, but that doesn't mean I'm right. It doesn't mean I'm not making a bunch of really poor assumptions, misguided, misinformed assumptions that could easily be solved with 10 minutes of Google. Next, we want to define what the solution is. And a solution has two components. It has an action and it has an impact. You don't want to just say half of the equation. The example here would be, we created a food truck compliance software, which reduces the average cost of compliance and the burden for food truck owners by 50% per our surveys, or whatever KPI, key performance indicator, whatever kind of KPI we're using to judge this. But notice there's an action and there's an impact. We're doing this, we're offering this, we're providing this, which leads to, X, Y, and Z. Next, we want to identify the target customer. This is a combination of end users and end value receivers / decision makers, which we'll talk more about. Really, it's about, yes, the market may be there, but just because the broader market is there doesn't mean you understand who the early adopters are. And the early adopters are really going to be critical for, getting that early demand, getting that first early activity going. And if you don't figure out not only who the broader audience is, but who the first audience is, you're going to run into a lot of trouble because you're just going to struggle to get demand when you could have demand. It's one of those, you don't want to sell the late adopter. They're too hard to sell in the early days, and they won't come unless they see a bunch of other people are already on the bandwagon. You want to sell the highest pain point, ideally with the lowest barriers to conversion, meaning if you're trying to sell to a food truck that's got 5,000 units or 5,000, food trucks, there's probably a lot of bureaucracy and meetings and admins and director of operations you have to go through. If you're selling to someone that has one truck, right, and has to do everything themselves, yeah, you may make less money, or maybe you don't. Maybe that's your perfect audience the whole way through, but maybe this is where you start and then you build it more over time. And last but not least, we want to confirm demand from potential customers. Now, there's so much that we're going to do, obviously, to talk through all the customers that you need to speak with. And the big goal, of course, is not just to talk to them, but to build demand from them. Great. Let's dive into day one, Monday. So our goal first is to define the idea, the version one, and the value as clearly as you possibly can as you understand it. This is one of those, you want to get all of the assumptions, all of the very specific details. It's one of those things where I go, I want to create a health and safety software. It's like, okay, well, what do I mean by health? What do I mean by safety? How many layers of compliance are we talking about? If I was to understand more about this problem, whether I just know it because I'm kind of intuitive to the business or have some background knowledge, or I need to go Google it and learn it, this is my goal. It's to understand it, to get specific. So first, we have a couple questions we want to ask ourselves, and here are the kind of key areas that I try to focus on: specification. Number one, what is it? Meaning, like, what type of business, what type of product or offering is it specifically? This helps people just get an understanding of it. Is it a piece of software? Is it a piece of hardware? Is it an app that you have to download? Is it an app that you can access online? Is it something in between, right? Is it a tech-enabled service where part of it is technology and part of it is actual, like fingers typing and doing things and providing consulting services? It doesn't matter what it is. It matters that you have a very clear understanding, not of what it's going to be for forever, not even what it's going to be 3 days from now, but what it is to you today. Next, who uses it? The end user, meaning ignore the value chain. If this was a piece of software that we were selling to some big giant enterprise, yeah, it might be like the CEO or the COO that signs off, right? But it's not to say that the COO or the CEO is going to be the end user. This could be just the guy working the food truck, or anybody on the team, or the little intern. Again, whatever it is for the specific industry, you want to identify, all right, who's actually touching this thing? Because you may see, again, end value receiver. This is an important person because, of course, the end user may be the person that owns the food truck. The end value receiver obviously is them because they don't get fired or what have you. But more than anything, it's the business as a whole. And if it's a one-man shop, then, of course, the person who makes the business decisions also gets the benefits. So everything's good. If it's a really big organization, then it goes, you have two different audiences. I have to sell to you so that you enjoy using it, and I have to sell to you so that way you understand the value in it as far as what it'll do to your organization at large. And who pays for it. Now, this can vary. So sometimes you have 3 different audiences. Generally speaking, the end value receiver and the end decision maker are going to be a lot of the same person, because if you just think about it, like from an enterprise basis, who's going to decide? Let's just assume the CFO. Well, who receives the value? Well, yeah, the whole business, but functionally it's the CFO, because they're approving a budgetary thing that then is going to come back and hit them, right in the budget. Therefore, it kind of goes to show there. An example that exists outside of this, which I think is always very good, is if you're selling software or things targeted to, let's just say, high school or college kids, or even younger, if you're working with like kids, they don't have a debit card, right? They don't have a credit card, which means, yeah, they may be the end user, and yeah, they may even be the end value receiver, because let's just say it's a teaching tool. But the end decision maker is going to be their parents. And to a certain degree, they're part of the end value receiver, because now they have, in theory, a smarter kid. But the majority, right, 51% of the value received is going to be with the child, despite the fact that the decision to get the software, to make the purchase, whatever it is, came from the parent, who is the decision maker. So notice, you want to think of these not as just bundles of words, but how do they specific attributes, because how you speak to each person may change depending on what role they have in, whatever area you're particularly talking to. Next, why would the decision maker pay for it? This is a big thing, because everyone is on, constrained resources. Even if they're not, they are, because very few people like to waste money. And if they want to waste money, they'd rather waste it at the club, not waste it on, random junk that they already don't need. I mean, how many softwares do you have right now that you're not using? How many things are you trying to use and remember? And 3 weeks from now, you're going to remember that you have it in the first place. It's like, yeah, unless there's really concrete value connected to something, it's very hard to use it, to remember it, to appreciate it. So getting a clear understanding of the one or many reasons, or could even be changing reasons, why a decision maker would actually want your software, very, very helpful. Where does this begin? Market research begins with Google and all the GPTs. This is ChatGPT, this is Perplexity, this is Grok, this is just the general front page of Google, this is Reddit. If it can be Googled, it should be Googled. This is one of those things where when we get to customer interviews, you definitely don't want to be incredibly ignorant on basic facts related to your business when those facts are available for free. And even if you didn't understand it, like let's say you asked ChatGPT, or if I went to ChatGPT right now and said, teach me about food trucks and tell me about the people that are in the industry and what they do and complaints, I could just ask it 100 questions. Let's just say I didn't understand some of the words. I could say, hey, can you dumb it down? Hey, can you write this like an 8th grader? Still a little tough. Can we go 5th grader? This is a one-person sport, and you just need to do whatever you need to do in order to get comfortable, get knowledgeable, and of course, get moving, because that's what's critical. And especially part of that critical piece is knowing the background. You don't want to be proceeding with ignorance. Big kind of checklist that I always hit: news and headlines, because the last thing you want is there to be a brand new release or a brand new thing that's really, really relevant to this industry or this business, but you're not paying attention to it and you didn't Google it. And then when you get on the phone with somebody, you look and feel like a fool. Industry reports, this is super helpful, of course, because sometimes the industry is changing. Sometimes they're moving more towards compliance, more away. If I'm selling a compliance software and there's news headlines about a recent industry report that says that compliance is going to be one of the main focuses for the next year, that's a great tailwind for me to take advantage of and to know and to reference. Because what if, and this is part of it, customers always want to buy because of the carrot, but it also helps if there's a stick chasing them, right? There's a reason why you have insurance for your car, because you're not allowed to not have it, right, legally. Last, direct and indirect competitors. The very simple kind of mindset for me is I want to flood myself with information. My favorite kind of founder, and one I always aim to aspire to be in any business I build or participate in, and what I encourage with my startups and different clients that I work with, is I want you to be the bored founder. Not bored like you don't want to be there, but bored like if I go, hey, why don't you tell me about this industry? You go, oh my God, where should I begin? All right, so recently we've been doing this and the industry's been going there and customers are saying this. Like, you're saying it like you've said it 1,000 times. It's like, yes, because you know it, right? PhDs don't stutter when they talk about, their thesis. You want to know why? Because they spend every waking moment thinking and talking and breathing about it. Therefore, when it comes up, they're prepared and they're ready and it sounds natural and they sound confident. Don't you think those are things that would be especially helpful, right, in the early days of building a business? Because you're going to need customers, you're going to need teams, you need to hire people. Like, there's a lot that goes into this. Confidence, information, competence broadly, very, very helpful. Day 2, Tuesday. Now we begin to research within the network and conduct some initial outreach. Now, we're not done reading headlines, meaning if you're still not done doing it from day 1, this is one of those, maybe this isn't 5 days, maybe this is 5 weeks for you. Who cares? I just want to give you kind of a very compressed version. I just feel comfortable working at this speed, depending on how long it takes me to get interviews, because I know exactly what I'm looking for. I know exactly, oh, your customer's doing this, and what's the demand, and how clear is it, and what's the value? Like, I just bullet right at it, but you can always stretch these out to make it a bit more digestible. So first, who do I know that is impacted by this problem? Or Who do I know that knows people that are connected to this problem? It doesn't matter if you are your own audience. It really helps, right? In a perfect world, it does, because then, especially during the sales and customer discovery world, you just reach out to the people you already know. So this is kind of option one. If you already know tons of people, it's great. You can start sending texts, you can get on the phone. We'll talk about this. You're not going to do any surveys. Again, very respectfully, I ban you from doing surveys. You must talk to the customer, because you're building this business to help the customer and get rewarded with money. You're not building this business to run BS surveys that deliver no value, that give the illusion of information, which lead to 3 wasted years. That's how this plays out if you don't take it seriously. Let's just be very clear here. Now, if you don't know, if you're not, your own audience, you're not your own customer, and you don't have immediate direct connections, chances are you didn't just fall out of it, you didn't come to this idea randomly. You know one person, or you know someone that knows someone, right? Let's pretend, my audience, I work with a lot of startups, right? Both on my own and for consulting. If I didn't know any startups personally, I would go to either other founders that I've already worked with or already know, which is in my personal life, and ask them to make introductions. Or I would go to events and start meeting people and start talking to organizers and have them make introductions. And notice, you don't have to be directly connected to your audience. You can be one removed and talk to them and still get access, as long as there's a good channel for you to do so. The goal is to get a few calls scheduled ASAP, ideally today, right? Tuesday. If I have to wait the next day or the next week, what have you, but I'm running to the conversation, because as soon as I've done my industry research, I want to go hit it against a real person. I want to see that impact and go, how right was I? How much do they care about this? Is what I read on the industry true for the audience that I meet? Because as I said, there's early adopters, there's late adopters, there's the general mainstream, etc. What if the first 5 interviews that you have are all with late adopters accidentally? You can't control that, right? But that means you have to have another 5 and another 5 and another 5. And likely they're not going to have a big sign right on their forehead that says, I'm a late adopter. They're just going to not be that interested, or ask you questions like, well, how many reviews do you have? And how many downloads? And how much this? And it's like, well, we're not there yet. So notice, we're trying to get exposure, but we're also not trying to be too critical, because you don't know, are you talking to the perfect audience, or are you talking to someone that hates your product, or are you talking to someone that loves it 3 years from now? You can't know that until you know that. So in the meantime, data. We want to collect data. Let's define some of your initial customer discovery questions. This is my kind of base template where I mentally start when I'm going out to do interviews. And then from there, I evolve it. So it can change based off of the conversation. It can change based off the industry, or how much or how little I know about the business. But fundamentally, this is where I'm kind of, mentally starting. First, what is the hardest part of, in this case, handling health and safety compliance as a food truck owner? Notice I'm trying to dig into a pain point, like, where does your body hurt the most, right? I want you to go like, oh, my arm's broken. I don't want you to go like, I have a little scrape on my knee. It's like, that's not helpful, right? No one cares about your knee. You spray it, you rub some dirt in it, you move on. The arm bone is showing. We should fix that, but I can't see it. You have to tell me. And this is my way of going, hey, what's wrong with your body? And I want you to say, my arm's broken, because then I can go, hey, if I fix that, you'll give me money, right? In this example. So what's the hardest part of this health and safety and food truck compliance? Good. Tell me about the last time you encountered this problem. This is really helpful, because you lose a lot when you ask general questions, meaning like, how was, dealing with compliance over the last year? Kind of a good example would probably be like, hey, how was doing your taxes last year? And let's just imagine that you file yourself or something. If you think back on it, you kind of go like, well, it was fine, no big deal. But if I went to you the day you were filing your taxes last year, you were probably stressed, you were probably struggling, you had issue A, B, and C, and this was that. But notice, because you got too far removed from it, because you're painting with this big, broad brush, you lose the details, right? You lose oh, I ran into this issue and I ran into this. You just go like, it was a pain, but nothing major. It's like, that's not helpful when we're trying to solve that pain, right? We have to ask, we have to dig in. So tell me about the last time. Tell me about when it happened. What was the last time you went through a compliance check? How was it? When was it? Was it a long one, a short one? Was it one of your regular ones? Was it a special one? Again, you're getting details, because what if they give you tons of information on their most recent compliance visit, and you don't ask, hey, what was this for? And they go, oh yeah, we had a huge health and safety error, and they did a random assessment on us. That's very different than just the regular, run-of-the-mill compliance check, once a year or however often they do it. It's that's totally different. And if you don't take the time to ask that little context, you miss so much, and you could come to a completely different understanding than if you had that little data. Next, why is this hard? Things can be hard for a lot of reasons. One of the easiest is a lot of times solutions will offer what the customer needs, but not in a way that the customer finds acceptable or accessible. It could be, we'll just use the two easiest. One is it's too expensive or too hard to use in that way, where it's oh, in order to do food safety compliance, the main one that everybody uses is $5,000 a month. We're a little shop, we can't use it, it's too expensive, you have to pay all these recurring fees, it's just not good, whatever. Okay, that's really hard. It's really difficult, right? Why is it hard? Could also take the angle of, oh, when we do our food truck compliance, we keep everything on paper. It's really hard because last year we actually had a fire in the food truck and we lost a lot of our documents. It's okay, why was this hard? Gave me two completely different pieces of information. Again, let's imagine it's two interviews. One talked about the issues in the industry and why it's hard to be compliant. It's hard to be compliant because I can't afford the good compliance solution. Really good to know. The other one is it's hard to be compliant and look at this major issue I ran into. Well, right here, the immediate thoughts that start to come, and they're not permanent thoughts, right? They're just thoughts, and I want to kind of marinate on them, are one, okay, it sounds like price is something I should be really, conscious of as I proceed, because they're already thinking about price. And the second is, okay, when I'm looking at distribution, when I'm looking at protections, it seems like protecting their files and making sure nothing is lost, whether it's backups or redundancies or this, that, and the other, that would probably be a good selling point as well. Because imagine how much easier this, hypothetical food truck owner's life would be if they didn't lose all their paperwork last year in that fire because they had it stored on our system. Notice, really good information, really heavy, meaty, helpful information, but you don't get it if you don't dig. What, if anything, have you done to solve this problem? This is really good, and this really goes to kind of address the whole status quo thing, where it's, okay, you're not just... theoretically, you're not just letting it all go by you and just ignoring all your compliance. You're probably doing something. Let's just hypothetically say they use Google Docs and papers, right? They've got a random folder of paperwork and they use some Google Drive. They drag and drop some important emails and call it a day. It's okay, well, now I have an understanding of how they think about their solution. Because remember, when you walk up to them later with your full built out product that you can't wait to show them, they're not coming to you with your understanding and your reality of the business. They're coming to you with their reality. And if their reality was Google Docs and paperwork, you have to help translate them. You have to go hold that hand and walk them over to your solution, because what if it doesn't click the way that you want it to? What if, again, a perfect world, hopefully it does, but sometimes you have to kind of get them, because they're going to go, oh, where'd all the paperwork go? It's oh, it's right here. That's very different than go, check out this software solution. It does everything. It's hey, we notice you do A, B, and C. Our solution actually covers that. A is located here, B is here, and C is here. In addition, we have D, E, and F, which do blah, blah, blah. This relaxes people. This gives customers and potential leads, comfort. Good things. What don't you love about the solutions you've already tried? This is, again, checking to see if they're using any main competitor or if they have any primary complaint. Perfect example is I have a buddy who's working on a startup, and his whole offer, The whole reason his idea came to be is the industry standard solution is only enterprise grade, meaning only the biggest, most expensive, you're willing to spend 10, 20, 30, 50 grand a month type companies can afford it. And his idea was, well, what if I just build what they have, a simpler version, but with like the core, key features, 1, 2, 3, and charge a fifth the price, a tenth the price? Pretty compelling, right? Pretty understandable, pretty clear as an offering. And notice the whole what you don't love. It's like, I don't love how expensive it is, and I don't love that it's only built for enterprise. So if they just fix those two things, this guy could have $100 million annual a year business on his hand, because there's a lot more small players than there are large players generally. Last is specific questions you thought of during ideation, specification, or research. You're going to keep learning. You're going to keep digging. And these interviews, they don't just flow one way, and they don't just all happen the exact same way. You're going to have one conversation where the second question is 90% of the interview. But guess what? It's really good because you're getting good intel. I don't expect to get the same questions through with each interviewee. I don't expect to collect the same level of data. Some are just super high level and they can't communicate what they want to say. Some are incredibly detailed, almost too much. And some are, perfect. It's, very much a Disney story, right? Too hot, too cold, just right. But in this way, with each one of these, not only are you getting more knowledgeable on the business and on the customers and on the industry, all this good stuff, you're sharpening your own blade. You're getting better at interviewing, better at digging in, better at going, hey, what's that? They said this. That seems interesting. 3 conversations ago, somebody else said something similar. I'm going to ask them more about that. Yeah, you didn't ask the first woman, but you can ask the second guy, because now you actually have the thought based off the first conversation. Again, we're building these thoughts brick by brick by brick, and then you get to have, thoughts that you couldn't otherwise see, because now you've got a little, tower you can climb on. Day 3, Wednesday. We're halfway through. So I try to rush as quick as I can to customer discovery calls, assuming I don't make a fool of myself without doing proper research. So it's kind of grind the research out as quick as you can, because getting to the interview is really critical. So if I can get to that day 2, I want to. If it takes till day 3, 4, 5, whatever, I will. But within the first week, within the first 2 weeks, I'm talking to people. Goals. I want to see what they focus on, meaning I'm going to ask all these questions, but I want to hear, what are the pain points? What are the things? Do they talk about paperwork, right? And how annoying that is? Do they talk about reminders and how annoying that is? Do they talk about, UI, UX, their user experience using the current solution versus, what we're theoretically going to give them, which is much simpler and more fluid and AI enabled, again, what have you. But I'm trying to dig in on what they care about, because founders care about solving problems and creating businesses. Customers care about solving their own problems. And so if you can come there and go, hey, in exchange for me wanting to solve your problem and you telling me all the specifics about it so I can do it, I get all the money. And it's like, great, sure. But if you focus too much on what you want to solve versus what they want you to solve, you can see how things, can go a little south. What leads to emotion? People are people. Plus or minus, good or bad, love them or hate them, they're people, and people are emotional, and they make decisions largely based off of emotional, rationale. An oxymoron, sure. But what that really means is, if you don't play to the emotion, if you don't play to the frustration or the happiness, as an example, if the most annoying, frustrating, mind-bending part of doing this compliance was managing all the paperwork, and I show up and go, hey, what's the issue? What's here? And they go, oh my God, do I hate paperwork. Like, it is literally the worst part of my week. I can't even be, and there's so much. It's 11 p.m. on a Friday, and I'm filling out temperature information. Like, I hate this. It's like, whoa, listen to all that emotion, that frustration. my kind of go-to on this is listen for the curse word, because if someone just starts cursing up a storm in the middle of your meeting, they're probably feeling something, and that means you should pay attention. Later, where do they clearly see value? Now, customers are interesting because the way I like to think about it is it's almost like a blind drug dog, if that makes sense, or like a drug dog that can almost get there. Like they know if they're in the room where there's drugs, just like a customer knows if they have a problem or knows if a software is valuable. But imagine if the drug dog couldn't pinpoint it, right? They're like, this is the room, but you got to find out where in the room. Kind of similar to startup founders, where a customer in that example, right, they can get really frustrated about all of this stuff. And yes, they may say like, oh, it'd be great if I had notifications. And maybe notifications are the answer, but very rarely is it good to listen to, you know, a blind customer. You want to collect all the data and come to your own thoughts, your own opinions, your own solutions, even if it aligns with what the customers are saying. But you want to try and come to it as much apart from them as you are listening to them, because if you just provide what they offer or what they say, it can be very easy to get pulled by the whims of any given customer. Whereas I like to still care about them, still listen to them incredibly, you know, super, super focused. But it's like, I want to collect all the data and then I want to sit in my chair and I'm going to make a decision. And then from there, I'll go out and test it with the customer. Remember, we're still learning right here. We're in customer discovery. We're not in customer knowledge. That comes when you've got millions of dollars a year in revenue. You can talk to me about how much you know your customer. Until then, you don't know anything, right? Let's just cut the BS. This is where you can also make it real, depending on how much clarity you have with a customer and with your interviews. Making it real takes a lot of versions depending on, you know, how comfortable you are with technology broadly. It could be that you do a wireframe where you build it out and you have like you're in Figma or Canva or Photoshop, or use someone on Fiverr. Maybe you're really tech savvy and you actually can get a functioning or non-functioning MVP, like a little prototype where you can click through it. Maybe you can do a whole mock-up, right, where you can make it look like it works, or maybe even have something work. It doesn't really matter how you make it real. It matters that you're kind of putting the skeleton together. My go-to, because I am not artistic or colorful in any way like that, you can see the green screen behind me, keeping it nice and clean. I go with flowcharts. I'm a flowchart fan because I can also always update flowcharts. I can add little nodules, I can add notes, I can connect new dots and new lines. It's perfect. I take this and I bring it to my marketing team or marketing people or whoever it is, depending on the project, and then they beautify it. And all of a sudden now we have something that can get shown to customers, right? If I'm talking to a really sophisticated customer, I may even just go in with the flow chart because I know that they can understand, even if it's just dots on a page, they go, hey, this makes sense and this makes sense. If I'm talking to a less sophisticated customer, whatever that means to you in your industry, maybe I need to have the visuals. Maybe I can describe the app all I want, but if I just show them like some mocked up pages that cost me $100 or whatever on Fiverr to get them to see like, here's how your notifications would work and here's how this would work. And you see that light click on in their head and they go, oh my God, this is what I need. Like, this is perfect. That's what you want. Now, notice we're making it real. We're in the process of doing things. Nothing is done, nothing is defined, nothing is permanent. It's about getting kind of the knowledge on the paper and tweaking it. Knowledge on the paper, tweaking it. Big thing here is listing all of the must-have features and functions, and here's the trick. As few as possible. If you can offer one thing, one feature, and that's good enough to get started. I'm not saying it's where you're gonna end your unicorn journey, but if you can start with one thing, it's good to start with one thing, because once they trust you on one thing, that trust can carry over to features 2, 3, 4. But if you offer them a suite of 10 features and 3 don't work, you are failing 30%. And trust me, they may love the 70%, but they still see that you're failing the 30% and they don't like it. So my whole goal is I want to understand what are the must-have features, functions, requirements, whatever, that without them, it's not worth buying. Meaning if I kept deleting and deleting and deleting features, but they would still buy it, get them the hell out of here. If there's only 2 features, but I need them for them to buy it, perfect. That's what I want to put all my attention on. And again, I could be wrong. This is a hypothesis. So I'm going to put it in there, and then I'm going to test. And if it works, great. And if it doesn't, bail. Creating a flow chart of user experience. So this is another thing. You can have the best solution in the world, but if you don't have a good process and a good flow for the average customer to use it, it can often get unused, right? A good example would be if you wanted someone to do something health related, let's say stretching, or let's say you wanted to get somebody to do something health related. Yeah. Put that thing in their health regimen already. Meaning if they go to the gym for an hour, can you wedge it in there? So that way they're already in their like flow chart state of, hey, well, you wake up in the morning and you go to the gym. Now, while you're at the gym, we have you do one extra thing. And here's what it does. And notice now you've built a journey for the customer that makes sense. You're not just saying like, well, hey, do this health thing. It's like, oh, I don't know where to fit that in my day because I'm busy and I do this. It's like, oh, well, it would fit right here. It's like, ah. Or when you eventually get to testing the product, you test it with a bunch of people and you go, hey, when do you find yourself using our solution? And they go, oh, I actually use it when I'm at the gym. When I'm on the treadmill, I find it very easy to, do X, Y, and Z. So I just knock it out then. Well, now you have this knowledge. So when you go sell to the next customer, you can go, oh, it fits right into your workflow. If you go to the gym, are you a gym goer? And they go, oh, yeah. Like, oh, we have lots of customers who use this on the treadmill. And they go, oh, that's perfect. That totally would work for me. But notice you're trying to really understand the flow of that customer's experience, because the better you can make it, the longer they're going to stick around. Day 4, Thursday. Of course, no surprises here. Continuing on yesterday's work, everything from interviews to product development, meaning maybe yesterday you started with a flow chart and today you're working on creating more of like a mock-up, right? Like a real visual on Fiverr or in Figma, or using templates or using some AI app creator, whatever it might be. Wireframes, prototypes, mock-ups, nothing crazy. More high-level customer discovery calls and in-person meetings. A good note. Always a call or a meeting over a survey. And in the early days, always a meeting over a call, because even if the meeting is wasted, meaning like, let's say it's a bad interview, you stand so much more to gain by being in person if it goes right. So it's like, if it's bad, it's going to be bad no matter what. But if it goes well, the rapport that you build, the relationship, the information that you gather, it's way better. And I say this just empirically from everything I've done. It's one of those, sometimes doing the less efficient thing is actually more efficient, because yeah, the meeting may take longer and you have to drive there and you have to plan this, but the level of information and quality of information you get from it is so overwhelmingly better than the other stuff. It makes it worth it. Mind you, high risk, high reward, but let's be clear, that's every part of the startup journey. Can start mixing them in. I definitely recommend you do. At this point, depending on who I'm speaking to and how confident I am, this is when I would probably start bringing in the visual. And notice these interviews may change. The first ones are me going, well, tell me about this, and how about that, and what's your experience here? This type of interview or this type of conversation, the nice thing is, can be follow-ups from the previous ones and say, hey, I was working on our idea and I wanted to run some things by you. Do you have 15 minutes? Now you get on, you walk them through the flow. And again, same principles. You're looking for emotion. You're looking for where they see value. You're looking for the topics they focus on. The same principles are going to carry through this whole thing. But notice I'm doing it because now I'm going from open-ended questions to discover. Now I'm testing a hypothesis. I'm going like, I think if I show them these 5 screens, they will feel positive emotion on most of them. And then I go put it before them and I see that on 2 of the screens, they hate it. And 3 of them, they love it. It's like, great. Now I've got intel. I was wrong. And the world didn't end. Who cares? But now I can be right, or I can at least get more right over time by questioning those 2 pages. Did they not see the value? Did they not understand the value? Is it UI, UX? Am I just dead wrong and I should focus on the other 3? Maybe they think they like the other 3 pages, but of the 3, there's 1 they misinterpreted. So it's really only 2 they like. And notice just question after question after question, but part of the journey, part of the struggle, and part of, solving all this thing. So again, see what they focus on. What leads to emotion? Where do they see clear value? Big question I try to ask here when I'm showing someone a product or really kind of getting in the weeds is, where do I think their willingness to buy, buttons are? Meaning the simplest sentence would be, if our software did X, would you buy it? Now, it doesn't mean that you ask them that question directly, because often, putting people on the spot a little bit may not be good in the early days. But if someone reacts with crazy emotion to one of your features and not at all to the other, I think it's pretty clear which is probably the button you want to push if you're going to test something. Fair enough. Friday. More specific customer discovery calls. This is that whole element of customer validation, where discovery is I'm learning, validation is I have thesis, like many hypotheses that I want to then go test. Oh, I think the customer is actually the small one, not the big one. Oh, I think our customer has 3 trucks, not 1 and not 10. Oh, I think our customer wants this page, not this page. Notice now that I've got background info from the industry, I've got background info from the customer, I've got background buildup of my own intel and what I've learned and the wireframes and stuff. Now I'm pushing these assumptions and I'm starting to get some clear measurements. Like if a survey could capture this, amazing. Survey can't capture this quite yet. So that's why this type of stuff is so valuable. Again, you can tweak your questions, you can tweak your messaging, but the goal here is to start pushing assumptions and seeing reactions. I would rather push an assumption and have them go, hell no, you're wrong, than I would continue to ask infinitely general questions, which don't tell me and don't give me a positive or negative signal. Doesn't mean be aggressive. It just means speak in statements, be clear, make assertions, ask for clear feedback, etc. Again, you can improve the visuals, the value focuses, whatever. How accurate is your assessment of where the willingness to buy buttons are? At this point, you may even get people that are starting to want to buy. This is that whole, hey, Aaron, we started with customer discovery, but now we're at sales. Exactly. This is exactly right. The whole goal of this is you can have many reasons for talking to a potential lead, some of which may bear fruit and some may not. Every lead you talk to may, at some point you may want to convert or may try to convert. Doesn't mean they all will, but you start by learning, then you start by testing. Then they see that you are real stand up and real motivated and they love your product or they love the idea behind it. And now these become your early adopters. These become your first customers. And now when every other founder has spent $200,000, 6 months, 3 team members with equity they don't even know if they've earned or not, and they push out this product and it all goes to hell, you'll be standing there with infinite leads, or at least more leads than you had at the start of this journey, and definitely plenty to kind of get the train going, and be wondering, man, why did they waste so much time? It's like, yeah, they did waste a lot of time because they thought they knew more than they did. That is, whether it's intentional or unintentional, it's arrogance, right? It's overconfidence. I try to progress through these startups by taking it slow, checking things. Slow, it's like, what is it they teach you? Like smooth is fast, right? If you do, or slow is fast. Like if you do something properly, then you can actually get through it quicker versus if you try and rush through it and just end up messing the whole thing up. This is a big thing with founders, is that, validation is critical and really helpful to de-risking and expediting the whole journey, but it can be way more tempting to just start building a bunch of things. But building and just doing a bunch of tech development isn't building a company. It's working on a science project. If we're building a company to solve problems for people, to offer solutions to them that solve their problems, and of course, to get compensated in return. That's a different nature than I want to build something cool, right? You have to have a business model for what we're doing. Conclusion. We're 5 days deep, 5 days, 5 weeks. Good Lord, should not be 5 months. If you're taking 5 months on this, wrong. Gotta do it differently. So by this time, we've learned a bunch. We ideally have some pretty good confidence in where we're at, whether we're really confident we're right or we're really confident that we're definitely not right. I enter the keep or kill phase, right? Is my goal to keep going with this business, meaning keep validating, keep building leads, and you've probably been wondering where all the legal and compliance and forming the company and all these things. Yeah, none of that matters until you know if there's a business in the first place. Now, this doesn't mean that if you have plenty of money and are really competent in startup stuff, you can't go form the entity and get all that stuff up and running first, because truth be told, it's not that difficult. You just have to have a little bit of know-how. But that's not why you're building a business, and those things don't actually contribute. You can always go fix that and build those things, but you can't make up for customer discovery you've never done. So at this point, I want to focus very heavily on what I do is, am I keeping forward with this idea? Am I going to go form the entity? Am I going to talk to team members? Am I going to try and build more demand? Am I going to build a website? Am I going to start moving and moving and moving? Or has the customer told me they don't need it? They don't want it. They're not willing to pay for it, or maybe it's the wrong time, or maybe they already have a solution that works great. Again, I don't really care what the answer is. I just care that the answer is known to me. With that very aggressive week, we definitely have a good start on idea validation. If things are going really well, this is the part where I would go from like a prototype where it looks like it works to going, okay, let's assume I build an entity. Let's assume I do this. How much does it cost to build something? Can I build it myself? Is there a white labeled solution I can use? Do I have people that are already interested in building it, like a developer or CTO? There's so many ways to kind of, cut that cake. It's really a question of, okay, what is your degree of certainty and what makes sense for you next? At a minimum, if you have strong validation, this is where you set up your legal. That way you're just protected broadly. And then from there, it's a question of, hey, if the demand is incredibly high, it might be good to start building a little MVP and get those first customers, get those first case studies. If you're still really unknown, or you still have a lot of questions before you build it, but you're still feeling confident about where the results, have led you so far, maybe you form the entity and then you continue customer discovery, continue, cheaper, rough prototyping, and then you go build things later. And maybe you have to build the team before you can build the product a bit. Maybe you have to raise a little money because you determine the product takes $25K to build. You don't know anybody on your team. You're going to have to hire a local development shop that you went through and vetted, cost $25K. So now that you've done this validation, now you're going to go raise money. Well, let me ask you, who's going to have an easier time raising money? You that didn't do all this work, or you that has all this work behind them? It's like, I think the answer is pretty obvious. The latter version is going to have 1/100th, the pain trying to raise money versus the former. And that's really it. It's overwhelming. There's layers to everything, as you can see. The way I like to frame things is, things can be simple and still be very difficult, right? It's simple for me to go deadlift 10,000 pounds. It's pretty difficult to do so, right? Impossible to do so, but it's difficult to do so. In the same way that it's simple for me to say, well, go talk to your customer. But the actual execution of it, those little nuances, I wanted to give you pieces to pick up on and pieces to use that you'll then fold into your own understanding and come to your own way of figuring out and navigating this founder journey. So hopefully this was helpful. Hopefully now you have a better, way to start the first days of your startup, and I'll see you in the next video.